multiple failed startups, then stumbling on what could have been a $1 billion idea, selling that idea for $70 million, getting a new CEO who then throws a $75,000 lavish party just to fire a large number of employees afterwards, then hitting 50 million users in 2011 and shutting down in 2015, joining the graveyard of failed tech startups that had the potential to rival the biggest tech companies in the world. This is the wild story of Mxit, the $70 million disaster that was Africa's failed Facebook. Mxit was founded by Herman Heunis, who was born on a sheep farm in Namibia. He would later leave Namibia to go study computer engineering at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. In 1997, he started his own company called Swist Group Technologies. The company specialized in building software solutions for big companies such as Vodacom, Telkom, and other telecommunications companies in South Africa. He would use the profits of Swist Group to fund the research and development arm of his company called ClockSpeed Mobile. In the year 2000, ClockSpeed Mobile released its first project, which was a massive multiplayer mobile game called Aria. The game was SMS-based, but you could also play it with a graphical interface via its website. The game was a massive failure due to two reasons. One, SMSs were super expensive in the early 2000s, and two, the cell phone was still relatively new in Africa, and not many people had bought one at this point, let alone to play games on them. After this, they tried other ideas that all failed, which included a search engine, a marketplace platform, and many other projects. In 2003, Herman Heunis would begin thinking about creating a social network. The idea stemmed from the days of Aria. He realized that the reason Aria failed was, as previously stated, SMSs were just too expensive and phones were still low in usage numbers. But at this point, the number of people who owned a cell phone in South Africa had increased dramatically compared to the year 2000. To add to that, internet access was increasing in South Africa. To combat the prices of SMSs, Herman planned to build a social network that used the internet rather than SMS technology, but they still had one major problem: data costs. Data costs for internet access were still very expensive for the average cell phone user at the time. To solve this problem, they made Mxit a super lightweight platform. It had a very basic graphical user interface to ensure that it did not have elements that were unnecessary to keep the platform as efficient as possible, thus making it more affordable to use. The messages sent through the platform were compressed to reduce the file sizes as much as possible. Mxit was officially launched in 2005 as a paid service. Yeah, that didn't work. Imagine paying to use Facebook. It was a decision so bad that 4 months after launching, they only had 40 users in total. They subsequently relaunched the app as a free service. Mxit used viral marketing tactics to target 16 to 21-year-olds. Within a few months of Mxit going free, they had reached 90,000 users, and just 18 months after their initial launch, they had hit 1.6 million users. At this point, they were gaining about 7,000 new users daily. But why was it all of a sudden so popular? Well, the first reason is that it was extremely cheap to use. At the time, the average cost of a message in South Africa was about 30 cents. Mxit, on the other hand, was free to download and free to use with an internet connection. Their only charge on the platform was a 1 to 2 cent messaging fee for any messages sent in chat rooms. Another huge benefit was the length of the message you could send. With SMS, people were limited to only 160 characters compared to Mxit messages, which could contain about 2048 characters. Also, after compression, message file sizes on Mxit were less than a single kilobyte, meaning after factoring in data costs, it was still way cheaper than using SMS. By January 2007, Mxit had more than 3 million users and was having 11,000 new daily signups. Soon after, they would introduce ads onto the platform. Mxit provided advertisers with gender, age, and various other data to make sure their ads would reach their ideal target market. This level of customization for ad targeting was a big hit amongst advertisers.
Shut up and take my money!
Keep in mind that these were the early days of the internet in South Africa. Parents didn't know what to make of their children using their phones to communicate with friends, much less how they could monitor their children's usage on Mxit if they viewed it as an invasion of privacy. Mxit as a company was not doing a good job of moderating content posted on the social network, which ended up in thousands of underage children being exposed to pornographic material accidentally. To add to this, because people could essentially fake their details on Mxit, many news reports began to surface of missing children who had been lured into meeting what they thought were their online friends, but turned out to be criminals. While it wasn't Mxit's fault that bad actors were using their platform for nefarious activities, people were still upset with the company because they aggressively marketed the platform to young children but did very little to protect children using their platform. The safety issue concerns for Mxit made up about half of its news coverage at this time, but that did not stop them from growing. In fact, they grew faster. By August 2010, they had reached 20 million users in 120 countries. Herman Heunis, the founder of Mxit, would at this point start to look for buyers to sell Mxit to. The statement he gave following questions about his decision to sell Mxit was, "My energy levels have been in constant decline over the past 18 months. Mxit has been my life for most of the past 8 years. I have invested millions into the company and poured enormous amounts of sweat capital." He managed to sell Mxit for a rumored figure between $40 to $70 million. It was sold to an investment company called the World of Avatar, led by a man called Alan Craig. It was at this point that the trouble that eventually led to Mxit's death would start. By August 2011, Mxit had 48 million users. Around this time, Mxit began receiving serious competition from Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, WeChat, and even BBM. Who remembers BBM? Definitely not me. Anyway, compared to these other apps, their user interface was bad. Remember, Mxit prioritized a lean user interface to ensure that it would require as little data as possible to use. But this also meant that their interface looked horrible, with the CEO calling it, quote, shit. To add to this, in 2007, a very significant moment happened for the mobile industry. Apple released its very first iPhone, which began the era of the smartphone revolution. By 2010, Android phones, following the lead of Apple, were also becoming more popular and, more importantly, cheaper with each passing year. These posed a great threat for Mxit, which had built its huge user base on feature phones, not smartphones. In fact, by 2011, Mxit still didn't have a native app for smartphones. The CEO genuinely believed that smartphones didn't have a future in Africa. This has to be one of the most famous last words in the tech industry.
Well, let's just put things in perspective. 650 million, almost 700 million phones on the continent, and about 75% of those are feature phones. And about 75% of all new phone sales are still feature phones. South Africa is a slightly low percentage of feature phones, I think it's 65% or so. But there's this huge, enormous market that it's not going to disappear. If people get better phones, they pass the existing phones down to their kids and to other people. So the feature phones are always there. Unless you've got a product that works across feature phones, you can't get anywhere in Africa.
As you have just seen, simply put, the reason why Mxit didn't have an iOS or an Android app is because the CEO thought smartphones were not going to be successful in Africa. Yikes. The CEO, Alan Craig, was well aware of the critical situation Mxit was in, having been quoted as saying, "Mxit has one chance to get this right." So like any other sane tech CEO joining a company, he threw a lavish party costing around $75,000, then soon after proceeded to lay off a huge portion of the employees. After this whole saga, he doubled down on the feature phone market and invested about $7 million into rolling out Mxit to the rest of Africa. A year after the acquisition he left the company after investors didn't see him as the right person to run the company. In 2012, Mxit would launch Mxit Moolah. Moolahs were basically digital tokens people could purchase to use on the platform to buy things like gaming skins and pay for music streaming. But there was one problem. According to how much they had invested in the platform, they would need to sell more than 500 billion Mxit mullahs to just break even. Keep in mind that Mxit was marketed to young teens as a cheap platform to message friends. This demographic simply did not have enough money to buy Mxit mullah. By January 2015, Mxit had dropped to have less than 1 million active users on its platform. In that same year, Mxit scored a 0 out of 7 for secure messaging by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. For context, Facebook scored 2 out of 7. The very same Facebook that has compromised hundreds of millions of user data had a higher score than Mxit for platform security. It's safe to say that Mxit simply didn't prioritize security on its platform. Mxit would later be shut down in 2015. One could conclude that Mxit failed because it failed to adapt quickly enough to the changing digital landscape, but I don't think it's quite that simple. The reason for its failure boils down to these 3 reasons. Number 1, they didn't know what they were. In fact, a big disagreement that in part led to the resignation of its former CEO, Alan Craig, was a general disagreement on where to take the app. Some members of the board wanted it to expand globally, and others wanted to convert it to a fintech platform of sorts. This lack of clear direction and vision was critical to its failure. But wait, this also doesn't paint the whole picture. WeChat is a super app that allows people to make payments, message other users, book rides, and find dates. It doesn't seem to have an identity crisis. Far from it, it is currently worth over $60 billion. So what makes what Mxit tried to do different from WeChat? Nothing. Mxit was just way too early. In 2020, less than 11% of payments in South Africa were made online. Compare that to China, which has around 80% online payments penetration. Number 2, their monetization strategy was bad. Mxit tried to monetize way too much way too soon. They were not focused on growth enough. All the shifting of these resources to different projects meant there was no clear consensus on what was the most important thing for Mxit, and thus users began to question why Mxit was better than other apps and just decided it wasn't, so they migrated to other apps. A key difference between Mxit and WeChat is WeChat gradually added features, following on the success of previous features. Mxit, on the other hand, would just bombard users with new features nobody asked for. The strategy it took towards how it would make money ultimately was the reason why it didn't end up making money. They should have chosen a single route of monetization and gradually added more as the years went by and users began to want more from the platform. But instead, they focused way too much on profitability to the detriment of their user experience. Number 3, the final nail in the coffin. They failed to adapt. By the time they realized that smartphones were the future, they released a native mobile app for smartphones in November 2013. Its user interface was well designed and it was packed with useful features, but unfortunately for them, it was a little too late. By that point, smartphone users had become accustomed to using apps like Facebook and WhatsApp and were not willing to go back to using Mxit. It was at this point when Mxit realized they had failed to expand in Africa, so they decided they were going to try to go after the Indian market with the same strategy. The strategy that failed them in Africa. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work, as feature phones were also in massive decline in India, which eventually led to Mxit's death in 2015.
No. Wait.
Mxit is a tale of 2 stories, one story being before it was sold, and the other being after it was sold. The first Mxit was a pioneer. It innovated a whole new industry in Africa. It was one of, if not the first social network in Africa. It had a clear goal to make messaging as cheap as possible, and they succeeded, forever being remembered fondly by its young users. Mxit, after the acquisition, is the story of corporate greed and CEO arrogance. After 2010, Mxit was no longer the only game in town. New competitors were springing up every day, and they simply failed to compete. Thus, users began leaving, and to add to that, they wanted to make as much money as possible and forgot the most important thing, their users. Mxit is a story of what could have been, but ultimately a tale of caution on what happens when bad and arrogant leaders prioritize money over users.